Welcome to Sandsmoke Nocturnes.
In this episode, we offer you peaceful rests, blood hunts, and perilous quests.
So relax your mind.
And let your soul give in.
We'll see you on the beach.
You ready?
Yeah. You?
Yeah.
Fire and water, land and sea, we pray these words bring peace to thee. Spirit of night we now invoke, of moonlit sand and midnight smoke. To Sleep by John Keats. O soft embalmer of the still midnight, shutting, with careful lingers and benign, our gloom-pleased eyes, embowered from the light, and shaded in forgetfulness divine. O soothest sleep, if so it please thee, close in midst of this thine hymn my willing eyes, or wait the amen, ere thy poppy throws around my bed its lulling charities. Then save me, or the passed day will shine upon my pillow, breeding many woes. Save me from curious conscience, that still lords its strength for darkness, burrowing like a mole. Turn the key deftly in the oiled wards, and seal the hushed casket of my soul.
The Case of the Witch Woman by Hilda Morris. I am a nurse in St. Margaret's Hospital, and my name is Ellen Graves. I am 35 years old, and I am, or at least I was before the events which I'm about to narrate took place, a person of cheerful disposition, sound common sense, and few illusions. That I am so still is doubtful. Few persons could witness the things which I have seen without a resulting shock to the sense called common, and a sharpening of those intuitions which perceive danger in commonplace surroundings. The doctors generally gave me woman patients, and frequently of the neurasthenic type, as my personality is, or was, supposed to be calm and restful. Early last fall, I was assigned to the case of a young woman, a schoolteacher, who was suffering from a nervous breakdown. She was a pretty young thing with great mournful brown eyes and appealing ways, like a child. She was ill for a long time, and I became very fond of her. When she grew better, and her eyes could smile a little, we had happy chats together. We talked of books and fancy work, comparing our likes and dislikes. We were particularly fond, as breadwinning women often are, of describing the kind of home we should like to have for our very own. I like a fireplace, a big one, a tea table, and the very newest magazines piled up beside a deep chair, she pictured, like a little girl playing house. Yes, and a cat, I added. I like a fireplace and a big purry cat beside it. Her eyes had been happy, but at the word cat, they clouded over. A worried, nervous frown drove the smile from her face. I had an awful dream last night, she confided. That's what woke me up, you know. It was about a cat. I did not want her to tell the dream if it had been unpleasant, and I moved hastily to put up the shade and speak of the sunshine, but she went on. I thought it was here, in this room, glaring at me from the corner. It was a very big cat, a black one. It was just going to spring at me when I woke up, all shivery, and you came in. Well, there isn't a cat within 3 blocks of this building, so you needn't worry. And how do you know that the cat was not going to rub against you and purr? Do you want milquetoast or custard for supper? I thought I had driven the ugly dream successfully away. We talked on for a while longer, and I told her some of the funny incidents that happened daily in a big hospital. When I left her for the night, she was cheerful again, yawning sleepily and declaring that she intended making up whole weeks of sleep. I spent the hour between 11 and 12 at the desk in the hospital corridor. I was on duty, and being very tired, I endeavored to keep myself awake by writing letters and forcing my mind to attention. In spite of this, I think I must have dropped off for a few minutes, pen in hand, for I have a recollection of being roused out of unconsciousness by a sound of a piercing shriek. It was not the cry of mere physical suffering, such as nurses become hardened to, but a shriek of fear, wild, unreasoning fear. I realized, after a breathless instant, that it came from the direction of the room occupied by the little schoolteacher. As I sped down the long corridor, the sound was repeated once, and then there was silence. I entered, and snapping on the light, found my patient rigid with terror, her wide gaze fixed on her hands, which she held stiffly before her face. It was some moments before I could rouse her, and a period of hysteria ensued, during which she cried repeatedly, "The cat! The black cat! It bit my wrists! Look, they are bleeding!" I examined her wrists and found not so much as a scratch on them. Yet she declared that they were bitten and bleeding, and seemed unable to take her eyes from them. To quiet her, I bound them up, and giving her a sedative, sat with her until she slept. The doctor believed the hallucination to be due to a slight relapse in her nervous condition, and I reproached myself for having allowed her to recall the ugly dream of the night previous. Strangely enough, the patient declared that she had not been asleep when the apparition appeared. She said that an enormous black cat had appeared suddenly at her bedside, dim in the half-light, with glaring yellow eyes. She had cowered away into the far corner of her bed when it sprang at her and attacked her wrists. She insisted that I search the premises and be sure that there was no cat about. This I knew to be an absurd precaution. There never had been such an animal in the hospital, which was a large building set in a park that occupied a whole square. Vacant lots extended for 2 squares on 2 sides of it, the river bounded the 3rd side, and a large public school building stood in the middle of the square on the 4th. To humor my patient, however, I made a search and inquiries, finding, as I had expected, that no cat had ever been seen in the hospital. The young woman became quite cheerful by the afternoon of the next day, and the doctor decided that the frightful fancy had done no serious harm to her condition. I left her light burning low and sat in the corridor near her door, occupying myself, as I had the night before, with writing letters. The hours passed, and all was quiet, save for the muffled night sounds of a great hospital. Another nurse was to take my place at 12, and when she arrived, I arose sleepily, intending to hurry off to bed for my brief hours of rest. But before I reached the door, there was a cry. A heart-rending shriek of terror, such as had sounded from my patient's room on the night previous. The other nurse stood rooted to the spot with fear. She was a brave, strong girl, fearless every day before death, but the scream filled her, as it did me, with unspeakable horror. I dashed into the room to find my patient white and still, one wrist locked tightly about the other, as though to stanch a flow of blood. We revived her with difficulty. Her pulse was so low that I was frightened and sent for an intern. He was much puzzled. Her condition, he said, had taken a decided turn for the worse. She appeared to be suffering from a sudden and most unaccountable anemia, as if she had suffered a loss of blood. She insisted on keeping her hand locked about her wrist, declaring that it bled. I bound it up tightly to humor her, and she murmured something unintelligible about the cat. We decided that it would be best to move her to another room where the strange hallucination might not pursue. This was done, but she still felt afraid in the hospital, and after a few days was taken away to the home of friends. Her recovery there was slow, I have heard, and the physicians were never able to exactly explain her condition. The room which she had occupied remained vacant for several days. When next it was assigned to a patient, I was again given the case. This time it was a woman of about my own age, a rather stout woman, who had always been in robust health until a sudden attack of appendicitis laid her low. Her physical condition was splendid, her blood perfectly pure, and she had made rapid strides toward recovery from her operation. She was impatient to return home to her husband and children, and worried occasionally over the way things might be going on at home. Her 2 little girls came daily with their nurse and regaled her with stories of their school and play.
"The kitty's had a fit,"
the 6-year-old announced one day in pleased interest.
"She's better now, but she had an awful fit."
Mrs. Sturtevant showed the first sign of nervousness I had ever seen in her. She shivered slightly. "Don't speak of cats," she said. "I had a horrible dream of a cat last night. I want you to get rid of that kitten before I come home." The conversation veered away from the subject, but I felt a distinct sense of apprehension. To make it worse, I did not know exactly of what I was afraid. I asked the nurse who was on hall duty to look in on my patient once or twice during the night, and I went off to bed. But I could not sleep, which was unusual for me. As the hour neared 12, I decided to get up and sit by the window, thinking that the moonlit view of the broad, placid river nearby might quiet my nerves. I had barely taken my place at the window when I heard it. Mrs. Sturtevant's scream. I suppose I had been waiting for it, without daring to acknowledge that fact to myself. I sped down the hall in dressing gown and slippers, regardless of regulations. I found the other nurse, herself terrified, endeavoring to quiet Mrs. Sturtevant, who kept repeating hysterically, "The cat! The cat!" Like the little schoolteacher, she declared that her wrists had been attacked and were bleeding. She appeared to feel very weak. I bound up her wrists and stayed with her until morning. The other nurse was in a very nervous condition. She declared that she had hurried to the room immediately upon hearing the scream, and that she had distinctly seen a large, dark body disappearing through the window, which led to the roof. She had leaned out to look after it, and was sure that it had re-entered the building through one of the windows of a charity ward some distance away. Nearly everyone in the hospital had heard the shriek, and there were numerous inquiries as to its cause. It was decided to make a thorough search for the cat and see whether a stop could not be put to these unfortunate occurrences. The fact that Mrs. Sturtevant had been lying awake when it appeared to her made it seem probable that the animal really existed. A thorough search, however, failed to reveal any trace of the cat, nor could any person in the institution affirm that he had ever seen a cat there. The hospital authorities were satisfied by noon of the day following to let the matter drop. But Miss Banning, the other nurse, and I decided to watch. We said nothing more of the matter to Mrs. Sturtevant, but I assured her that I would be near her that night, and leaving the light burning, I succeeded in getting her to sleep. She slept, but neither Miss Banning nor I could do so. As midnight drew near and nothing occurred, we felt a trifle more easy, and I urged her off to bed. "Wait until after 12, she insisted. Even as she spoke, the clock chimed, and with it came Mrs. Sturtevant's shriek of terror. I had never heard anyone else scream as did the occupant of that room. We were standing near the door and entered in a second. There on the bed stood an enormous black cat, larger than any that I have ever seen. It had an indescribably evil appearance, its mouth hungry and snarling, eyes glowing like green coals, back arched and rigid, with stiff, upright fur. For half a second we gazed, fascinated. Then, before we could stop it, the thing dashed through the window. and as I leaned out, I saw it clearly in the moonlight enter one of the windows of the charity ward. Needless to say, another search was made, but nothing came of it. I think the hospital authorities came to regard us as slightly mad, though no one could deny that the fright of my patients had been real enough. Mrs. Sturdivant, though terribly shaken up, was unhurt. She declared that the creature had sprung at her wrists and would have attacked them had it not been frightened away. She refused to pass another night in the room, however, and as her condition was favorable, she was taken to her home. I was decidedly averse to receiving another patient in that room. It was in a new section of the hospital, and there was a room next to it which had not yet been furnished. When I was assigned to another case in the first room, I begged leave to move the furniture into the room next door, which was of the same size and shape. This case was that of a little girl who had broken her leg and collarbone in a tomboy attempt at tree climbing. Her name was Susan, and she was a delightful, tanned, healthy kind of little girl that tomboys usually are. She was very impatient and restless, and I had a hard time keeping her quiet. I read her story after story and answered countless questions. One day, after she had been there about a week, I sat reading to her from Alice in Wonderland and came to the part about the Cheshire Cat. Ugh, don't read that, please. I hate cats, and I dreamed about a horrid one last night. I almost dropped the book in my perturbation at this remark. Then, not wishing her mind to dwell on the dream, I turned to another part of the book, and we were soon laughing gaily over the royal croquet. But as I read, a sudden suspicion entered my mind. Going to the window and leaning out under the pretense of wanting air, I discovered two things which disturbed me very much. The room in which Susan lay, and the room which my former patients had occupied, were the only two rooms opening onto the roof, which led to the charity ward. In one of the gray snow patches which lingered on the roof, I saw distinctly the footprints of a cat. I determined to make my own investigations before complaining to the hospital authorities again, as I had already got myself laughed at for my persistence in believing that a cat lurked about the hospital. It was not yet noon, and I had plenty of time to make a search before night, when I felt sure the thing was bound to appear again. Going to the charity ward, I asked one of the nurses whether she had seen a cat, and told her what had occurred. She had laughed at us before, and was not inclined to take this seriously. "I've not seen the cat," she assured me, "and I've got worries enough of my own. One of my patients has taken to sleepwalking and has frightened the others half to death. They spoke of it some nights ago, but I never caught her at it until last night, and then, would you believe it, she was just climbing in the window. Goodness knows how long she'd been out on the roof, and if she had fallen off and killed herself, the blame would be mine." This was exciting enough to make me forget, for a minute, my anxiety over the cat apparition. "Who is the patient?" I asked with some curiosity. "That old crone in the bed near the window. She's Italian, lived in a hovel by the railroad tracks, and was injured by a train. Nearly bled to death. She really needed a blood infusion, but charity patients can't have that unless they have devoted friends, and she has none, apparently. But she has been getting better lately. The doctors say it's quite wonderful. She'll probably leave before long." The story was commonplace enough, surely, yet something in it interested me. I walked over and looked at the old woman. Her black, beady eyes stared at me without winking. Her skin was like yellow parchment. Her nose hooked as an eagle's beak over a toothless mouth. She was a decidedly ugly old woman. "She looks like a witch," I remarked, going back to the other nurse. "Yes, with the evil eye," she agreed, and we both laughed. I returned to the subject of the cat, and after securing a promise from the nurse that she would be doubly watchful that night, I went in search of Miss Banning. We decided to watch together by Susan's door. This time, however, we were determined that the animal should not escape us. Miss Banning had secured a promise from one of the interns that he would come up about 12 o'clock with his revolver. If the thing appeared, he was to shoot it. I cannot begin to tell how long the hours seemed until 12. Though I had expected and dreaded the nocturnal visitor before, never had I experienced such a wild feeling of apprehension as I did that night. Miss Banning, too, was affected. We started at every sound. When Susan called for a drink, I shook as though she had screamed. When the rubber-soled interns came down the hall, their noiseless tread seemed to my excited fancy like the padding of gigantic feline feet. It drew near to 12, and our ears were strained to catch the slightest sound from Susan's room. I tiptoed in and found her asleep, and coming out softly, I left the door ajar. It was only a minute later that I heard a soft sound, softer even than Miss Banning's whispered question. Creeping cautiously to the door, I saw it move. Even as I reached it, the latch clicked and I heard the key turn in the lock. Susan was alone with the thing. Miss Banning fainted at Susan's scream. I think I should have done so too, had not the intern arrived just then, revolver in hand. Somehow I managed to gasp out what had happened. We dashed into the empty room next door to Susan's and through the window to the roof. All the time, we heard the child's cries. Wild at first, then low and gasping. By the time that we reached her sill, they had ceased altogether. There stood the cat. I could swear that its snarl was human. Its frightful mouth dripped blood. Its eyes flashed fire. For one instant, it stood so, its devilish forepaws resting on Susan's white wrist. Then, as the doctor fired, it sprang. I felt it brush past me heavily. I can feel it yet. The bullet went home, for it gave a hoarse cry of anguish as it thudded heavily from the roof. I fainted then, for the first time in my life. The intern must have unlocked the door and called for aid, for when I became conscious, one of the nurses was bending over Susan, who lay moaning pitifully. "Did he kill it?" I asked. "Hush," said the nurse. "Do get me some water." I pulled myself together, as a nurse must, and went into the corridor for water. I had gone but a step when the nurse from the charity ward came bounding down the hall with a frenzied look. "She's gone!" she cried. "My old woman's gone. They saw her come out on the roof, but she isn't there. Did she come in your window?" Who had turned the key in that lock? It must have been my sixth sense that revealed the answer. I could only stare at her dumbly. Dr. Andrews came back from the park below and reported that the cat had not been killed, but had apparently made off for the river. It must have been badly injured, however, for a trail of blood lay on the snow for some little distance. Dr. Andrews had seen nothing of the old woman. A thorough search revealed no trace of her. The river was dragged, but with no results. It was as if the earth had swallowed the old woman. Susan, recovered from her fright and apparently suffering from the same strange weakness which had affected the little schoolteacher, could tell us nothing. She had been awakened, she said, by the touch of the cat at her wrists. We told the child that the cat had been driven away and would trouble her no more. And indeed, it did not. She soon forgot her horrible experience, and before long, recovered her perfect health. Dr. Andrews was deputed the day after the occurrence to go with the others on a search in the neighborhood of the Italian woman's hovel. He told me the results of those inquiries, and I set them down here, with no word of comment. Who, in this modern world, could comment on a maze of facts that leads to only one horrible and preposterous conclusion? The woman's hovel was unoccupied. Italian neighbors testified to that. They had never seen her since she was taken to the hospital. They knew nothing of her except that she had been a witch, and they had feared her. One Giuseppe Romano volunteered to search the cabin with the gentleman. The door, strangely enough, was ajar. There was but one room, a dark, filthy place, full of vile odors. Giuseppe shivered and crossed himself. Dios! In the center of the floor stretched a huge black cat, dead. It had been shot.
Childe Roland to the dark tower came, by Robert Browning. My first thought was, he lied in every word. That hoary cripple, with malicious eye askance to watch the working of his lie on mine, and mouth scarce able to afford suppression of the glee that pursed and scored its edge, and one more victim gained thereby. What else should he be set for, with his staff? What, save to waylay with his lies, and snare all travelers who might find him posted there, and ask the road? I guessed what skull-like laugh would break, what crutch gin write my epitaph for pastime in the dusty thoroughfare, if at his counsel I should turn aside into that ominous tract which, all agree, hides the dark tower. Yet acquiescingly I did turn as he pointed, neither pride nor hope rekindling at the end descried, so much as gladness that some end might be. For, what with my whole world-wide wandering, what with my search drawn out through years, my hope dwindled into a ghost not fit to cope with that obstreperous joy success would bring. I hardly tried now to rebuke the spring my heart made, finding failure in its scope. As when a sick man very near to death seems dead indeed, and feels begin and end the tears and takes the farewell of each friend, and hears one bid the other go, draw breath freelier outside. Since all is o'er, he saith, and the blow fallen no grieving can amend. While some discuss if near the other graves be room enough for this, and when a day suits best for carrying the corpse away, with care about banners, scarves, and staves, and still the man hears all, and only craves he may not shame such tender love and stay. Thus, I had so long suffered in this quest, heard failure prophesied so oft, been writ so many times among the band, to wit, the knights who to the dark tower's search addressed their steps, that just to fail as they seemed best, and all the doubt was now, should I be fit? So, quiet as despair, I turned from him, that hateful cripple, out of his highway into the path he pointed. All the day had been a dreary one at best, and dim was settling to its close, yet shot one grim red leer to see the plain catch its astray. For mark, no sooner was I fairly found pledged to the plain, after a pace or two, than, pausing to throw backward a last view o'er the safe road, 'twas gone. Grey plain all round, nothing but plain to the horizon's bound. I might go on, naught else remained to do. So, on I went. I think I never saw such starved ignoble nature. Nothing throve, for flowers, as well expect a cedar grove, but cockle, spurge, according to their law, might propagate their kind, with none to awe, you'd think. A burr had been a treasure trove. No, penury, inertness, and grimace. In some strange sort were the land's portion. See or shut your eyes, said nature peevishly. It nothing skills. I cannot help my case. 'Tis the last judgment's fire must cure this place, calcine its clods and set my prisoners free. If there pushed any ragged thistle stalk above its mates, the head was chopped. The bents were jealous else. What made those holes and rents in the dock's harsh swarth leaves, bruised as to balk all hopes of greenness? 'Tis a brute must walk pashing their life out, with a brute's intents. As for the grass, it grew as scant as hair in leprosy. Thin, dry blades pricked the mud which underneath looked kneaded up with blood. One stiff, blind horse, his every bone a stare, stood stupefied. However, he came there, thrust out past service from the devil's stud. Alive? He might be dead, for aught I know, with that red gaunt and collop neck a-strain, and shut eyes underneath the rusty mane. Seldom went such grotesqueness with such woe. I never saw a brute I hated so. He must be wicked to deserve such pain. I shut my eyes and turned them on my heart. As a man calls for wine before he fights, I asked one draught of earlier, happier sights, ere filthy I could hope to play my part. Think first, fight afterwards. The soldier's art. One taste of the old times sets all to rights. Not it. I fancied Cuthbert's reddening face beneath its garniture of curly gold. Dear fellow, till I almost felt him fold an arm in mine to fix me to the place. That way he used. Alas, one night's disgrace. Out went my heart's new fire, and left it cold. Giles, then, the soul of honor. There he stands, frank as 10 years ago when knighted first. What honest man should dare? He said, he durst. Good, but the scene shifts. Faugh, what hangman hands pinned to his breast a parchment? His own bands read it. Poor traitor, spit upon and cursed. Better this present than a past like that. Back therefore to my darkening path again. No sound, no sight as far as eye could strain. Will the night send a howlet or a bat? I asked, when something on the dismal flat came to arrest my thoughts and change their train. A sudden little river crossed my path, as unexpected as a serpent comes. No sluggish tide congenial to the glooms. This, as it frothed by, might have been a bath for the fiend's glowing hoof, to see the wrath of its black eddy bespate with flakes and spumes. So petty, yet so spiteful. All along, low scrubby alders kneeled down over it. Drenched willows flung them headlong in a fit of mute despair, a suicidal throng. The river which had done them all the wrong, whatever that was, rolled by, deterred no whit. Which, while I forded, good saints, how I fear to set my foot upon a dead man's cheek, each step, or feel the spear I thrust to seek for hollows, tangled in his hair or beard. It may have been a water rat I speared, but it sounded like a baby's shriek. Glad was I when I reached the other bank. Now for a better country. Vain presage. Who were the strugglers? What war did they wage? Whose savage trample thus could pad the dank soil to a plash? Toads in the poison tank, or wildcats in a red-hot iron cage. The fight must so have seemed in that fell cirque. What penned them there, with all the plains to choose? No footprint leading to that horrid muse, none out of it. Mad brewage set to work their brains, no doubt. Like galley slaves the Turk pits for his pastime, Christians against Jews. And more than that, a furlong on. Why, there! What bad use was that engine for? That wheel, or brake, not wheel. That harrow fit to reel men's bodies out like silk, with all the air of Tophet's tool, on earth left unaware, or brought to sharpen its rusty teeth of steel. Then came a bit of stubbed ground, once a wood, next a marsh, it would seem, and now mere earth desperate and done with. So a fool finds mirth, makes a thing, and then he mars it, till his mood changes and off he goes. Within a rood, bog, clay and rubble, sand and stark black dearth. Now blotches rankling, colored gray and grim. Now patches where some leanness of the soils broke into moss or substances like boils. Then came some palsied oak, a cleft in him like a distorted mouth that splits its rim gaping at death, and dies while it recoils. And just as far as ever from the end, not in the distance, but in the evening, not to point my footstep further. At the thought, a great black bird, Apollion's bosom friend, sailed past, nor beat his wide-winged dragon pen that brushed my cap, perchance the guide I sought. For, looking up, aware I somehow grew. Spite of the dusk, the plain had given place all round to mountains, with such name to grace mere ugly heights and heaps now stolen in view. How thus they had surprised me. Solve it, you. How to get from there was no clearer case. Yet half I seemed to recognize some trick of mischief happened to me, God knows when. In a bad dream, perhaps. Here ended, then, progressed this way. When, in the very nick of giving up, one more time, came a click as when a trap shuts. You're inside the den. Burningly it came on me all at once. This was the place. Those two hills on the right, crouched like two bulls locked horn in fight, while to the left, a tall, scalped mountain. Dunce, dotard, a dozing at the very nonce, after a life spent training for the sight. What in the midst lay but the tower itself? The round, square turret, blind as the fool's heart, built of brown stone, without a counterpart in the whole world. The tempest's mocking elf points to the shipman, thus the unseen shelf he strikes on, only when the timbers start. Not see? Because of night, perhaps? Why, day came back again for that. Before it left, the dying sunset kindled through a cleft. The hills, like giants at a hunting, lay, chin upon hand, to see the game at bay. Now stab and end the creature, to the heft! Not here? When noise was everywhere, it tolled, increasing like a bell. Names in my ears of all the lost adventurers, my peers. How such a one was strong, and such was bold, and such was fortunate, yet each of old lost. Lost! One moment knelled the woe of years. There they stood, ranged along the hillsides, met to view the last of me, a living frame for one more picture. In a sheet of flame I saw them, and I knew them all. And yet, dauntless the slughorn to my lips I set and blew. Childe Roland to the dark tower came.
O nightly spirit, these words we weave may bring you peace until next eve. Descend your cloak upon this land of midnight smoke and moonlit sand.
Hey everyone, this is Victoria.
Hey, this is John. We are Jersey Shore Haunters. Thanks for listening to Sandsmoke Nocturnes.
If you're interested in submitting your own work to be featured on this podcast, please go to our website to learn more.
Yeah, writers who are selected will actually get the opportunity to have a short on-air interview with us about the inspiration behind their work and interesting stuff about it. Oh, also, we at JSH started out with the mission of compiling a list of the best yard and home haunts throughout all of New Jersey.
So if you're lucky enough to call the Garden State home, you'll be able to submit your haunt starting at midnight on Wednesday, September 23rd.
All of the best haunts will be compiled on an interactive map so people from all over can come and see your kick-ass haunt.
Yep, and if you haven't already, please like and follow us on Facebook.
Check us out on Instagram.
And also sign up for our email newsletter on our website. We're back Thursday, September 24th, 2020 with more poems and another short story.
See you then.